Have you ever had that feeling? That you're not alone in your home? That shiver down your neck that makes you look over your shoulder? That night, for me, started with a movie and a comfortable couch. My name is Rafael, and I was babysitting that night at the House of Echoes, an old, secluded mansion. I felt safe, in control, but then, I heard a whistle, a sad, ghostly melody that cut through the sound of the storm, and I saw a face in the window. My first instinct was to scream. My second was to realize what a terrible mistake I had made. This man was not a thief. He wasn't after jewelry or money. His goal was much more personal and infinitely more terrifying. He wasn't trying to break in and steal something. He was trying to recover something that the wealthy family I worked for swore no longer existed. Stay with me until the end, and I'll tell you how the sanctuary became a trap, how I took refuge with 2 children in one room of panic, and how the truth I heard through a steel door chilled my soul. Trust me, you'll want to lock your windows after hearing this. Get out of my house. The phrase, a primal scream of terror and defiance, would echo in my mind for years, a sonorous ghost haunting the corridors of my memory. But before the scream, before the panic that froze my veins and turned my blood into ice crystals, there was silence. A heavy, dense silence, only punctuated by the sound of the rain lashing the windows of the old Almeida mansion. My name is Rafael, and that night, I was the guardian of 2 little souls, Leo and Mia, being the nanny at Casa dos Echoes. As the property was known in the small town nestled in the valley, was more than a job. It was an immersion into another world, a world of high ceilings, furniture covered in white sheets in forgotten rooms, and the constant smell of old wood and wet earth. The house, with its late Victorian architecture, was a creature in itself, with its turrets that scratched the cloudy sky and windows that looked like empty eyes watching the passage of time. The evening began like so many others. The children's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Almeida, were on one of their business trips. They were distant, almost ethereal figures, leaving behind the smell of expensive perfume and a list of instructions printed on letterhead. Leo, 8 years old and with a seriousness that belied his age, was already in his pajamas, absorbed in a book about constellations. Mia, the little 5-year-old fairy, slept upstairs, her chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm, the personification of innocence. To dispel the loneliness that the house exuded, especially on stormy nights, I had chosen a movie, a loud action movie, the kind of escapism that contrasted violently with the gothic atmosphere of my surroundings. I settled into the living room. Sofa, a crimson velvet monster that was probably worth more than everything I owned. The fireplace crackled, casting dancing shadows over the tapestries that depicted hunts and bucolic landscapes of a forgotten time. Our home is our safe place, our sanctuary. The phrase, a comforting cliché that my mother always repeated, floated through my mind. And there, in that cocoon of warmth and light, I felt safe. The storm outside was just a dramatic soundtrack to my peaceful night. The first sign that something was wrong was subtle, almost imperceptible, a creaking in the floorboards upstairs. I attributed it to Leo, perhaps going to the bathroom, but the sound didn't repeat itself. Then, a flicker of lights. The storm, I muttered to myself, turning up the volume on the television. But a seed of unease had been planted in the fertile soil of my imagination. Rafael, Leo's voice startled me. He was standing in the doorway of the room, his big, dark eyes fixed on me. "Did you hear that?" "Heard what, champ?" I asked, pausing the movie. "The whistling, outside." My heart skipped a beat. "It must be the wind, Leo. It's really windy." He shook his head, a silent stubbornness in his gesture. "It wasn't the wind. The wind doesn't whistle a song. Ice, pure, cutting ice, ran down my spine. A song. The innocence of his perception was 1,000 times more terrifying than any horror movie. "What song?" My voice came out as a whisper. "I don't know." It sounded ... sad. I forced a smile, the effort pulling at the muscles in my face. "Go back to bed, boy." It must have been a dream, but I knew he wasn't dreaming, and I knew it wasn't the wind. I stood up, the velvet couch holding me back, unwilling to let me drift toward fear. I went to the front window, a huge floor-to-ceiling pane, and peered through the heavy curtains. Rain fell in silvery sheets, distorting the garden into a dark, blurry watercolor. There was nothing but the trees, writhing under the fury of the storm. I went back to the couch, but the comfort had dissipated. The sanctuary had been desecrated by doubt. Every sound in the house, once familiar, now felt like a threat. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway was the countdown to something terrible. The crackling of wood in the fireplace was the sound of approaching footsteps. Then I saw it. It wasn't a sudden movement. It was a subtle shift in the nightscape, a shadow that stood out from the other shadows, near the side window of the dining room. A smaller sash window, partially obscured by a vine of ivy. My entire body froze. The air in my lungs solidified. The explosions on the TV continued, sounding like distant mockery. The shadow moved again, taking shape. It was a human silhouette. Tall, thin, hunched against the rain. My first instinct was to rationalize. A neighbor seeking shelter, a lost traveler. But the whistling, the mournful music, no, this was something else. This was an invasion. My heart, which had previously stumbled, now beat wildly against my ribs, a caged bird desperately trying to escape. And then, the horror crystallized into a detail. The figure raised a hand, and in the dim light of the porch, I saw the metallic glint of something. A tool. He was trying to pry open the window. The sound, a low, sharp screech of metal against weathered wood, cut through the air and reached my ears. It was the sound of my safety being breached, the sound of my world falling apart. It was at that moment that the scream rose from deep within my soul, an eruption of panic and fury. "Get out of my house." The figure froze. Its head turned slowly toward me. I could not see its face, only its dark outline against the wet glass. For an eternal moment, we stood like that, predator and prey, separated only by a thin layer of glass and the rain that fell like tears. He did not run away. He did not startle. He simply lowered his hand and took a step back, disappearing into the darkness from which he had come. But the terror did not leave with him. On the contrary, it had entered, not physically, but like a poisonous gas, seeping through the cracks, filling every room, every shadow with its presence. I ran, tripping over my own feet, and turned off the television. The silence that followed was deafening. My ears were ringing. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely reach for my cell phone in my pocket. No signal. Sure, the storm, or maybe not. I climbed the stairs, 2 at a time, my only thought being the children. Leo was sitting on his bed, his eyes wide. He had heard it. "Rafael, who was that?" he whispered, his voice shaking. "No one, my friend. Stay here. Lock the door, and don't open it for anyone." "No one. Did you hear me?" He nodded, his small shoulders tense beneath his pajamas. I walked to Mia's room. She was still asleep, an angel, oblivious to the hell that had taken hold in her home. For a moment, I envied her. I walked back into the hallway, my body now running on cold adrenaline. The house, once a maze of wonders, was now a trap. Every hallway a potential ambush, every closed door a hiding place for the monster. He hadn't given up. I could feel it. He was out there, waiting, watching. The game had changed. It was no longer an attempted break-in. It was a hunt. I began checking the windows, one by one, my hands trembling as I worked the locks, my eyes scanning the darkness outside. With each locked window, I felt a tiny relief, quickly swallowed up by the immensity of my fear. In the library, a room I loved for its smell of paper and leather, I found something that made my blood run cold again. The window, the one high up near the ceiling, was ajar. A crack no more than a few inches wide, but it was enough. Enough for the wind to whistle, enough for a sad song to come in. I slammed it shut, the sound echoing through the silent house. And then I heard another sound, a scratching, coming from the kitchen. With my heart in my mouth, I moved silently, my bare feet barely touching the wooden floor. I peered through the half-open kitchen door. Nothing, just shadows, playing with the copper utensils hanging on the wall. And then, I saw it. On the back door, the one with the small glass window at the top, there were scratches in the wood, fresh nail marks, or worse. He was testing each entrance, methodically, patiently. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, to drown me. I needed to think. I needed a plan. The children. I needed to get them to safety. But where? Where? In a house that was being systematically besieged. I remembered the panic room. Mrs. Almeida had mentioned it once, almost as a joke. If an army of zombies ever attacks, she had said with a thin laugh, just lock yourselves in there. It was behind a fake bookcase in Mr. Almeida's office. It was our only chance. I went upstairs. Again, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Leo, I whispered through the door. It's me. Open up. The door opened and I stepped inside, scooping up the still sleeping Mia in my arms. Let's play a game, Leo. A treasure hunt in the dark. He wasn't stupid. He knew it wasn't a game, but he saw the terror in my eyes, and with the quiet courage only children possess, he nodded and took my hand. We walked down the hallway like ghosts, each creaking floorboard under our feet sounding like a gunshot. We reached the office. The room was dark, the only light coming from the lightning that cut across the sky. I found the bookcase. Help me push it, Leo. The bookcase was heavy. Our combined efforts moved it, with a groan of protest, revealing a steel door. There was a keypad. The password. My panic-fogged brain refused to function. I tried Mrs. Almeida's birthday. Nothing. Mr. Almeida's. Nothing. Their wedding anniversary? Nothing. And then, the sound. The sound of glass breaking downstairs. He was inside. The air escaped my lungs in a groan. Mia stirred in my arms, mumbling in her sleep. Think, Rafael, think. I whispered to myself. Leo's birthday. Nothing. Mia's single quotes. S-click. The light on the keypad turned green. The door unlocked with a pneumatic hiss. I shoved the children into the small, windowless room and followed them inside, closing the steel door with a heavy thud that seemed to seal our fate. We were safe. For now. The panic room was small, claustrophobic. There was a bench, a few bottles of water, and a phone. I picked up the phone, mute. The lines had been cut. Time dragged on in the darkness. Mia finally woke up, confused, and began to whimper. I soothed her with whispers, my own body shaking, uncontrollably. Leo sat silently, his eyes fixed on the door, like a little soldier at his post. And then the sounds began. Slow, deliberate footsteps in the hallway outside, the sound of his hand sliding along the wall. He was looking for us. Then the silence returned, a silence that was even more terrifying. What was he doing? That was when Leo spoke, his voice so low, I almost didn't hear it. He doesn't want mommy and daddy's things. How do you know? I whispered back. He's looking at the pictures. I heard him. He took the picture frame from the mantelpiece, the one of Aunt Helena, Mrs. Almeida's younger sister. She had died in a car accident, I'd been told, but there were whispers, half-baked stories about a rainy night and a car found in a river. The intruder wasn't a thief. He wasn't here for money or jewelry. He was here for a memory, for a ghost. And then he spoke. Her voice, muffled by the steel door, was a hoarse whisper. filled with a pain that seemed ancient. I know you're in there. I won't hurt you. I just want what's mine. Mia began to cry louder. I hugged her tightly, my own fear a cage around us both. What do you want? I cried, my voice breaking. There was a pause, and then the answer came, and with it, the terrible, dark realization of what was happening. I want my daughter. The world seemed to stop spinning. Helena, she had a daughter who, according to the official story, had also died in the accident. Your daughter isn't here, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She is, he insisted, his voice closer to the door now. Helena told me. She said she hid her here, to protect her from him, from Mr. Almeida. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, forming a monstrous image. Open the door, he said, his voice now pleading. Let me see her face, please. I looked at Mia, asleep again in my arms, her face serene, and then at Leo, who was watching me with an understanding no 8-year-old should have. The house was not a sanctuary. It was a tomb of secrets and lies, and we were trapped inside it with a ghost that refused to stay buried. I didn't know who the real monster was. The man outside the door, mad with grief, or the people who had hired me, who lived their lives on a foundation of tragedy. The man began to knock on the door, softly at first, then harder, each knock a thunderclap, each impact a crack in my sanity. I hugged the children tighter. The sanctuary had been breached, the walls of my courage crumbling. Outside, the man was crying, a broken sound that mingled with the howling of the wind. I didn't know how the night would end, if we would see the light of morning. The only thing I knew was that the heart, once it almost leaves the mouth, never returns to the same place. It remains forever a little out of place, a constant reminder that safety is an illusion, and that shadows sometimes have a face, a voice, and a terribly sad story to tell. And the House of Echoes, with its whispering secrets, would hold our story too. Another echo lost in its dark and endless corridors. And it was there, in that deafening silence, that the night hung suspended. Rafael, 2 children, and a terrible secret, locked behind a steel door. And outside, the sounds of a broken heart beating against the metal, begging to see a daughter the world insisted was dead. The truth is that the panic room door eventually opened. But what happened next? The confrontation with the Almeidas, the final revelation about Aunt Helena's fate. This is a story that the House of Echoes itself still whispers on stormy nights. It made me think, what if the intruder wasn't crazy? What if his story was the real one? The question that haunts me to this day is not what if he had come in, but rather, who was the real monster in that house? The man outside, driven by pain, or the people inside, driven by their secrets? Think about your own home, the walls that surround you. Do they protect you from the world outside, or do they just hide the truths that lie within? The next time you're safe in your room and hear a creak in the hallway, a whistle in the wind, ask yourself, which side of the door is the fear really on? If you, like me, are fascinated by the stories that hide in the shadows, then you've found your place. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the darkness is full of stories, and I'm here to bring them all to light. And I want to know your opinion in the comments. In Rafael's place, would you have opened the door?